start by thanking the Graduate School at Syracuse University for their support on this book, as well as my spouse, Jason Ritter, for his long-term support through this arduous and long process. Today I want to talk, I've had a wonderful time so far listening to our wonderful speakers and contributors talk a little bit about what we can do as graduate students, as faculty members, to sort of support ourselves and to move through this new and strange space that we have come to inhabit as strangers and hopefully as long-term residents for a lot of us. But I wanted to actually take a moment to talk a little bit about changing the narrative and to think a little bit about what we as first-generation graduate students, faculty members, and allies to the first-generation community can do for the young people who are coming after us, the students who are undergraduates, future graduate students, and perhaps someday future colleagues. So I want to talk about opening the door. Opening the door to higher education, opening the door to this academic world that is maybe a little bit insular at times, but is profoundly important to many of us. How can we give opportunities? What can we do to support our colleagues, our fellow first-generation students, faculty members, colleagues? So I want to talk about supporting first-generation students in the classroom and beyond the classroom. So first, just a few statistics, because I'm a social scientist and I like to start with statistics. So we're going to start there. 33% of undergraduate students in the United States are first generation. This is a decline. The first generation population has actually declined, and most scholars in the United States who study this suggest that this decline is primarily due to increased cost in higher education. It is more expensive than ever before to attend college. About 25% of students in the United States who attend undergraduate colleges are both first generation and from low income households. 50% are white, 27% Hispanic, and 14% are black or African American. 90% of students who are both first generation and low income will not graduate in 4 years. 4% of first generation undergraduate students will enter a doctoral program in the United States. They're 18% of total US doctoral students. And about half of these students will complete their degree. So about 2% of undergraduate students in the United States who enter higher education will come out with a doctoral degree. But as many of my colleagues so far have already said, first generation undergraduate students are a diverse population. They span not only demographic diversity like race, gender, sexuality, nationality, linguistics, ability and disability skills. Not only do they cross all of those intersectional spaces, but as Vincent and others have pointed out, they also have diverse experiences. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my experience, and then we're going to hear a little bit more from some different first-generation scholars and first-generation students from different levels over the course of this talk. So who am I? Well, I was the oldest daughter of a single mother who gave birth to me when she was 17. My mother and my family thought education was a good idea. My mother thought that perhaps it would be a great idea if I finished high school. She had never finished high school. My stepfather had never finished high school. My grandparents had never finished high school. So my mother thought it would be a great idea if I finished high school. She thought, I remember her telling me when I was pretty young, that perhaps I could get a good job after high school, if I finished high school. Maybe in a bank. I could work as a cashier in a bank. That would be a good job, she said to me. Maybe I could work for the post office, like my uncle. As I got older, I took this idea that I wanted to get education, do something different and do something more, until I decided I would go to college. Now, I didn't know much about what college meant. My mom didn't really know much about what college meant. She didn't know how you really got there. I didn't know how you really got there. And in the small rural high school where I attended, there wasn't a lot of support. There weren't a lot of structural supports for college-going students. There weren't a lot of college-going students. The majority of the young men and women that I went to high school with had now have agricultural jobs or service jobs in the local labor industry. But I wanted to go to college. And I knew there were some things that I needed to do. I needed to get good grades, and I needed to take a test. I didn't really know what the test was about initially when I took the pre-SATs. I didn't really know what that was. But I won an award, something called the National Merit Scholarship, based on my score. And that was a scholarship money that would allow me to attend college. So then I came to the conclusion I had to figure out how to pay for college. Now, it was easier back in the 1990s when I graduated than it is today. The debt load of college graduates who graduated in 2002 when I graduated was much lower than it is today, but it was still a significant financial investment for me to take out the loans necessary. Here's the thing. I loved college. I remember stepping on the college campus for the first time and thinking it looked like Narnia. It was magical. It was this wonderful place where I was going to finally figure out what I wanted to do. I got there. It took me a while. Now, all that being said, I imagined that it would be about getting to college. It would be about getting to graduate school. But what I actually found is this was a place that was fundamentally different from the world that I had known. And it required support from loved ones, and it required support and encouragement from faculty members for me to get through my undergraduate degree, let alone achieve a PhD. And so I want to talk today about what you can do to support students like me and students like you all who come into this strange place, this strange paradise, and don't really know what's going on. So we all have different narratives, different stories, different experiences. There's a diversity in our experiences, but there are some similarities for many, if not all, undergraduate students. Many of us experience what scholars sometimes call class shift or class shift trauma. And class shift is about experiencing a kind of disassociation, anxiety, embarrassment, shame, sometimes even anger at our families, at our new communities, at ourselves, as we struggle to sort of adjust to this. And I have a brief video here. This is by Cynthia Moreno. This is part of the University of Washington at Bethel's program, First in Our Families, which are brief narrative video essays. So we're going to see a couple of these. So I'm going to let Cynthia describe class shift trauma for you.
The messages flow back and forth all day and night, with 11 people in one group message, asking for favors of each other, usually gets a response within minutes. David can go pick up Jerry's kids. Mom can buy tortillas for Beto's party. Mary can translate for Alecea at her doctor's appointment. I'm not sure if they notice my silence, or how painful it is to have nothing to say. If they notice, They don't say so, but their silence towards me is understandable. What do I have to offer from hundreds of miles away? I miss my cousin's wedding to her incredible wife. I wasn't there for my mom's 50th birthday. My cousins believe becoming a social worker is beneath me. My nieces and nephews don't remember my name. I fear that they think that I'm too busy for them, as if their daily lives are not interesting to me, as if I don't love being a fly on the wall to the collective life that I'm no longer a part of. Their lives continue to go on, while mine is frozen in August of 2012, when my father, my sweet Bob, dropped me off at college. As we walked to his car, the leaves of countless trees blew all around us. For both of us, nature was a sight to behold. The world, for a moment, seemed to truly be greener on the other side. The side of brick buildings filled with people speaking an academic language that I now know better than Spanish. Our goodbye was short. Bob gave me a hug and said goodbye so fast that I'm sure he still thinks that I did hear him quiver. But the sound of his choked up voice is the music of my nightmares.
What can we do for Cynthia, for each other? We can support and connect with our students, encourage our students to support and connect, to remain engaged with their families, to seek out new families, new support systems, create families when they need to, in order to access the kind of support that they need to be successful. I have some practical suggestions. Like Vincent, I also have activities that I do in my classrooms. I do a budgeting activity for students that helps them understand poverty. Some of my students understand that more than others, let me assure you. But all of them, I say, go to your parents. Find out how much it costs to buy health insurance, to pay rent, to pay for utilities. Connect with your families. Sometimes we have to encourage our students to create new families. Sometimes their connections to their old families just don't work. For every student I've had that, like Vincent, has support from their families, I've had students who've been disowned, rejected, isolated from their own families, told, you're too uppity, you think you know more than me. You're not part of our world anymore. So one of the things we as mentors, as supportive faculty, graduate students, friends can do is encourage people to remain connected to their own families when they can, and when they can't, help them build new ones, or at least encourage them to do so. What else? Well, some college students experience a kind of invisibility, and a few of you have mentioned invisibility at times so far. This invisibility comes in many ways. It comes from the sense that you are occupying a place that was not built for you. The brick walls, the educational institution, the structures we live in, they were not built for first generation. They weren't built for students of color. They weren't built for members of the LGBT community. They were built for the people who have power and status in our society. And sometimes when we enter those, we experience not only a kind of stigma that leads to us to try and pass, to fit in, to be part of this world, but sometimes a kind of shame in our own inability to achieve the kinds of social connections that come so easily to our middle and upper class peers. A few of you have mentioned this issue, imposter syndrome. So I have a student of mine who came to me, an undergraduate student of mine who came to me, and she sat down and she says, well, I don't belong here. I'm thinking of leaving. And I said, well, why? You're doing well in class. She's like, I'm not really. Everyone here is smarter than me. And I'm like, how is everyone here smarter than you? In fact, I can assure you, based on grades, that everyone here is not smarter than you. And she says, no, let me tell you this story. So I went to an event. One of the faculty members invited our class to attend an afternoon tea. I don't really know what that is, an afternoon tea, but I went, and when I got there, there were these tables, and they had little teacups, and there were these little plates underneath the teacups. And I thought that I was supposed to take the little plate that was under the teacup, and I was supposed to take it and use it at the buffet. And so I did, and I sort of was filling up my little funny little plate that was underneath my cup, and the professor walked by and said, what are you doing? It's a tea plate. It's a saucer. Go and sit down. She says, I'm stupid. I'm stupider than my classmates because they knew what you're supposed to do at a tea party. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do at afternoon tea. So what can you do? How do you make students less invisible? Well, one thing you can do is make them less invisible by talking about their experiences. So in the book, one of our contributors talks about how a chemistry professor used the story of his family's beer and wine making skills to talk about chemistry. It's a lot easier for me to bring in the experiences of the working class into a course on sociology than it is for a chemistry professor. But your creative minds, think of ways where you can bring in the experiences of first-generation students, of working class communities, to make them less available, or make them more available, less invisible. That's what I'm going for. Less invisible. So address this individual invisibility in your classroom. Address it in, dare I say it, those department meetings, those committee service, that those of you who are going on to be faculty members or already are faculty members. Bring it up. Make first-generation students, make working class communities less invisible in our community, in our academic world, in your academic world. Another challenge that students sometimes face is fitting in. Now, fitting in is complicated because, as several of the scholars have, or several of my colleagues have already mentioned today, fitting in is one of those things that has pros and cons. But there are fundamental differences, class differences, and cultural identities, manners, customs, behaviors. And I have another story, because I like stories, and I'll be telling a lot of them. This one's about me. So when I was in graduate school, I was traveling with a colleague from the upper middle class. She and I were attending a conference together. We got to the conference hotel, and she was driving. It was, a couple hours, 2-3 hour drive, a couple hours, and I went to give her money, because that's what you do in the working class. When someone is spending gas and wear and tear on their car, and you're splitting, that's what you do, you give them money. She was furious, insulted beyond all belief. How dare I try and give her money? She was like, do you think I can't afford for my own gas? I don't want your money. Fitting in. Sometimes it goes beyond what our manners are or the way we dress to the very cultural conditions that underlie our existence. So what do we do about this one? Well, don't assume that your students, that your colleagues, that the people around you are familiar with the cultural references and practices of the middle class, because it is the middle class that dictates the norm of our institutions, right? Theirs are the norms that we see as invisible. They're the reason that there's a first generation, but we never hear about whatever we might call the non-first generation student. So because their rules are the rules we live by, we can't assume that everyone else knows those rules. Now, this is a struggle for all first-generation students, but I want to say that this, I think, is especially a struggle for graduate students. Undergraduate students experience this as well, but they are part of a more diverse community. Graduate students are overwhelmingly middle and upper class, and our faculty colleagues too. And it can be a struggle at times. So encouraging students, and sometimes modeling yourself by connecting with a larger cultural community. Participate in campus cultural and social lives. Learn about them and maybe try and plan a few of your own. Try and make connections, culturally speaking, build what we sociologists might call cultural capital, the ability to navigate a cultural environment. Another challenge that we often face is preparedness. Now, preparedness comes in a variety of ways. We often talk about the fact that first-generation students often have less strong educational skills in writing and mathematics than their middle and upper class colleagues, often because of the nature and the curriculum of the high school and even the elementary schools that they attended. Education is fundamentally unequal in our society, and we know that. And that's an issue, and there are ways that you can work with students. You understand that students are academically underprepared. Encourage your institutions. I know Syracuse is pretty good at that, but many of you will go out to other places at times. Encourage your institutions to provide support, tutors, etc. for students. But also, remember that preparedness goes beyond your ability to craft a sentence, and it includes an understanding of what you can expect in an academic classroom. What are the academic norms? What are the expectations of group work? What are the expectations, the norms surrounding in-class discussion? Sometimes just telling students that it is important and necessary that they take notes. Sometimes they don't know. Tell them. Be explicit. But also, assist graduate students in navigating the realities of their environment. Sometimes they just don't know all those little rules that we allow our institution to operate on. And I have another brief video from Becky Rosenberg, who's also part of the first generation digital storytelling project.
Sam came into the kitchen in a mug. Mom wanted the cookies. He was 16 and desperate to escape the drama of high school by getting into Running Start. But he missed the writing score he needed by a point or two. He was sure that he was trapped for the next 2 years, but I was pretty sure that I could provide the practice he needed to pass. So I told him to call the school and ask to retest. He was told he could, and a week later he got in. When I was 16, I was looking at college options. I knew I qualified for a New York State scholarship, so the state and city university systems were open to me. But I heard about a school in Oregon called Reed College. Something about the small liberal arts school on the far coast seemed ideal, so I wrote away for an application. At Thanksgiving, I got a phone call from a fellow New Yorker who was a student at Reed and had been assigned to call me as a prospective student. He told me a bit more about the school and he asked about my grades and test scores. He assured me that I was very likely to be admitted. I got off the phone stunned that I had a shot. And it dawned on me. I couldn't afford the bus fare to Oregon, much less tuition or board. So I never submitted the application. As I supported Sam through the Running Start process, I thought about the secrets I had learned as a college student, a doctoral student, and a faculty member. My mother, smart, sophisticated, well-informed, would have empathized with Sam's plight, much as she had empathized with my disappointment about Reed. So sorry, Standlee the test. So sorry Becky can't afford to read. But Mom had no idea that there was a second chance for Sam. Nor did she know that schools provided scholarships to capable students who couldn't pay.
So what can we do to help students like Sam and students like Becky? Well, we can help students, especially graduate students, learn all those invisible rules, social norms that underlie the foundation of our institution. I'll be honest with you, I'm still learning a lot of these norms and expectations. And I think for many first-generation students, it is a challenge to come to understand the nature of an institution that runs on secrets, as Becky calls them. It is those academic norms, learning to understand educational hierarchies and organizations, work expectations, the expectations of when and how you can work. Sometimes we have to encourage our students, especially our first generation students, not only to ask for help, but to engage in self-promotion. We have a few faculty members left here. I don't know if any of you have ever had a student come to you and say, but I worked really hard on this paper. Why didn't I get an A? Or, I worked really hard on this paper. Why didn't you give me an A? Right? Well, for first generation students, many of whom they just don't know that there are options. They don't know that they can put the work that they did volunteering at a local homeless shelter or food bank on their CV. They don't know that that has value. Sometimes they don't want to make a fuss. So they do the work, but they don't always know that they need to promote themselves effectively. So if we can provide our students with clarity about the expectations of academic norms inside and outside the classroom, graduate students in particular may need help with professionalization. Many first-generation students do, but it's especially the case for graduate students who are often assumed to already know how to dress, how to speak properly, how to engage in that horrible, horrible word that Roseanne brought up, and network. So encouraging our students to network, to connect, to engage in professional dress, and both modeling and providing support for how to do those things is essential. When I was here in graduate school, one of the most compelling things that I remember from one of my colleagues, who was also a first generation, talking about was a program in which there was a manners dinner, that graduate students were able to go to a sit-down dinner and learn how to properly manage those multiple forks and confusing plates and knives and all of that stuff that it seemed like their middle and upper class colleagues had known since birth. She talked about how she went in and sat down and just sat there for a minute and then realized that she was learning something that was essential to her future and entirely irrelevant to her family and to her past. Because her mother didn't really care what a shrimp fork was, right? Right. Networking. Now, I'm not sure if I can say much more about networking than Roseanne already commented on, but networking is absolutely essential, and we need to encourage our graduate and undergraduate students in networking, as well as continue to do it themselves. It's a struggle. It's a struggle for a number of reasons that we've already touched on, not the least of which there are fundamental class differences and class divides. I'd also like to mention the financial limitations on social network building. One of my students, an undergraduate from a low-income community, came to me actually just about a week ago and told me that she was considering dropping one of her classes, and I asked her why. And she told me that the class required significant levels of out-of-class work, which she was prepared for, and it required significant levels of out-of-class group work. And she had been assigned to a group who had decided that they were going to meet regularly at a local restaurant that's quite close to campus. I can't afford it, she said. I can't afford to eat off campus regularly. I can afford to eat, I have a meal plan. I eat at home in my dorm. I can't afford to go to Food 101, which is the restaurant, every week and eat with my group. It's just not possible for me. So what do we do? How do we connect? How do we network in ways that allow us to move across class divides? Well, it's actually not always easy. Another sort of story or another narrative that I want to mention is, again, from my own experience. So as a faculty member, I was at a conference, in one of my national conferences for my association, and I was working hard to network. I had just become a faculty member, was fairly young in my years, and I had a former professor who's actually still here at Syracuse University say to me, I will help you network, I will introduce you to some people. And so he did. He introduced me to a number of faculty members. Well, one of the faculty members he introduced me to was a faculty member at the University of California, Berkeley. And this faculty member came up to me and said, hello. And then she looked at my name tag. And she said, where's Concord, which was the college I was at, University? And I told her, and she said, oh, well, nice to meet you, and left the conversation. It's not always easy to network, but we have to be persistent, and we have to encourage our students to network. We can foster this as just a normal part, a required part of the graduate experience, or even the undergraduate experience for the students that we mentor. Incorporate group assignments or study groups in your class. I recommend avoiding the situation where they're meeting off campus on a regular basis, though. But incorporate group assignments. Allow your students to get to know each other. I incorporate group assignments in my introductory sociology class to encourage first semester freshmen to make connections and make friends. And my faculties and mentor, when I was in graduate school, encouraged me to engage in things like dissertation writing groups and to introduce them to people in their own social network. And I recommend those of you who work with graduate students do the same. Educational skills. Often when we think of educational skills, we think of a lack of understanding about college resources, and that is a significant issue. Many first-generation students don't know what resources are available. They don't know that you can ask for a extra time on an exam if you're sick, and you can contact your professor and say, I'm sick today. I need to retake this exam. They don't know necessarily about the writing center. They don't know necessarily about tutoring centers. I would also say that, as a few of you have mentioned already, for many first-generation centers, even when they're told or even when they know about their resources, they don't necessarily want to use them because it seems like an admission, an indication that you don't really belong here. If you take your dissertation or your final paper or your capstone project or your midterm project to the writing center and they find flaws, which they always will, What does that mean? Does that mean you don't belong here? Is that evidence that that tiny little voice inside you that is already always saying, man, do you really belong here? There's another element to educational skills which I want to manage, which is time management. So not only do we not believe we're here, there's ample evidence that we don't belong here because this institution is built with expectations for time and money that we don't necessarily have. But I'm going to let Kendrick Williams tell you a little bit about that.
Such a beautiful Friday morning. Geese are on the lawn eating the water-soaked grass as bypassers ride by with their fancy bicycles. Such a lovely, carefree scene and atmosphere you all got here. It must be nice to lay on the quad with no worries of the world, sir or ma'am. It also must be nice to attend school without working a full-time job so you can focus on yourself and not have to focus on taking care of your family, sir or ma'am. It must be nice to get into any college graduate program without the worry of quitting your job, sir or ma'am. It must be nice to not get called from your mother, facing eviction, needing $1,000 for rent, and if you send $1,000, you cannot pay for tuition because financial aid says you make too much, sir or ma'am. It must be nice not to have to prevent your mother from getting evicted at age 24. Learning to have someone in student accounts that you do not even know hold your life and future in their hands because you spend the $1,000 for tuition on your mother. It also must be nice to know that that $1,000 was meant to pay for your last semester in your graduate school program, and the school will not let you register until it's paid in full, sir or ma'am. It must be nice to have someone teach you great money management habits so you know not to take out those credit cards in college and rack up debt at 22 so you can not take out any plus student loans in graduate school, sir or ma'am. It must be nice to attend classes where everything's about you, sir or ma'am. It also must be nice to attend classes where you do not have to defend yourself and culture over and over and over again, sir or ma'am. It must be nice to just be a college student and live carefree. It must be nice just not to be tired.
So what can we do? What can we do for Kendrick and students like him? Well, we can try and incorporate some of those study skills, those life skills in our classroom where it's appropriate. We can encourage our institutions to have first-year programs that talk about things like money management and time management. We can remember that not all of our students are going to have those skills from their parents, who are going to be able to talk about when to take out loans and when not to take out loans, and how to manage time when you're working a full-time job. And we have to understand that some of our students have additional commitments. Sometimes they have mothers who need rent money. Sometimes they have children. Sometimes they have younger siblings that need a prom dress. Sometimes they have a kind of emotional and financial commitments that are going to interfere with their education. And that goes beyond simply their educational skills. So we can encourage our institutions to provide support for these students, and we can try and provide support for these students in our classrooms as well. And one of the ways we can do that is through mentoring. We understand that there's a diversity in relationships. There's diversity in the family support. Some of us are fortunate to have families who encourage enthusiastically our educational goals. Others of us, well, I've had students whose parents have disowned them for pursuing education. And there's a wide variety of family supports, there's a wide variety of expectations, and there's a wide variety of what our students need. I remember when I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, my mother, who'd been very supportive and continues to be supportive of that to me today, I said, I think I'm going to go to graduate school. I think I want to go to graduate school. She was confused. I just graduated. I thought you just got a degree. What do you need another one for? She asked me. Now, my mother was supportive once we clarified what it is I was actually talking about, but not every parent is. Not every community is. So, meet with first-generation graduate and undergraduate students. Talk to them. Sometimes you have to reach out and offer to be a mentor, or to help them find a mentor if you're not a good fit. Engage with them not only about classroom material, but about the culture of higher education in general, and as Millar and Roseanne both mentioned, professionalization, professional development. Being a mentor for an undergraduate student sometimes means providing them with material beyond simply what classes to take in the following semester. So developing a kind of understanding about the diversity within first-generation experiences can help us understand the diversity in our expectations in mentorship as well. Build and facilitate connections. Students can feel disconnected and isolated. All students feel disconnected and isolated. All students can feel this way, but for first generation, many of them lack what I call involvement norms. Involvement norms are those wonderful middle class identities in which your students are not only going to attend high school, but also have soccer practice and violin practice and Girl Scouts and. That's not a norm for the working class, or for many in the working class, and even if it was a norm or an expectation, it wouldn't be financially viable. So many of our students, both graduate and undergraduate students, come in thinking all there is to higher education is in the classroom. And when they do that, they miss out on not only developing a profound support system, but they can miss out on those professional networking connections. So what you can do, what you can help students do, is understand that who do you know that we discussed earlier, that the presenters discussed earlier. We can encourage our students to connect with campus activities, social groups, and for graduate students, especially important is disciplinary organizations. It is the case that some graduate schools don't encourage students to attend conferences. We should do that. We should encourage our graduate students to attend conferences, to meet people in the discipline, to make connections outside the walls of our institution and the areas in which we inhabit within our institution. And I also recommend that you consider, this is a very simple, practical, dare I say, common sense way to encourage involvement, is to provide information about its existence. Consider including announcements of events and organizations in your classroom. Tell your graduate students when the deadline for ASA is, or whatever your national association might be. Tell your undergraduate students about opportunities on campus. Encourage them to make connections and to commit and connect. Finally, I'm almost done, I promise. Finally, remember that graduate students, undergraduate students, faculty members, all of them have important differences, all of which can be valuable in your classrooms, in your committee work, and For first generation students, they sometimes have skills and experiences and lived environments that other students simply don't have. Problem-solving skills, because you were an oldest child who watched your younger siblings while your parents both worked. Critical thinking skills, because you had to figure out how you were going to pay fees for your graduation when your parents couldn't do it. Telling their story, allowing first generation students to tell their story, to encourage their story, is one of the most fundamentally important things we can do for them. Make them a part of higher education, make their stories a part of higher education. I will leave you with a final story. So this was my own experience. When I was in graduate school, I was taking a class outside my discipline. And in that class, there was a reading that was assigned that was about first generation students and their parents. And it was a reading that discussed a sort of extreme rural poverty and urban poverty. And as I was sitting in our class and we were discussing it, there was this moment in which one of my classmates said, "I don't understand this passage. Is this an attempt to sort of talk about someone's ignorance?" This passage in which you describe, when this first generation students describe a poor farmer who is walking on an open field and smelling the land. And it sort of evolved into this mockery of this character. Now, I'd grown up in a rural community, and I said, wait, no, that's not what the author is saying at all. The author is talking about having a deep and profound connection, that someone for whom working on the land is necessary for survival. There's this moment of silence, and everyone in the classroom sort of looks at me. What are you talking about? What's going on here? And the professor says, I never got that, but that makes sense, right? So this is a moment when my experience was able to contribute something more, something extra to the classroom. Many first generation students have experiences, have unique perspectives that can be valuable not only to our classrooms, but to the development and the future of higher education as a whole. So they have a wide variety of skill levels, but they have these unusual experiences, and we need to remember to empower all of those voices. Oops. So I want to end by thanking all of you, and a special thanks to Glenn Wright and everyone at the Graduate School Programs Office, and to all of you who support first generation students. And I want to take these last 10 or 15 minutes before we have to head off for our reception to take any questions, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask. Yes.
Yeah, it's not actually a question, it's another suggestion.
Okay.
This is for first generation junior faculty members, something I heard in a session years ago.
Okay.
That when you go to a conference, if you hear a talk and you feel that you really like, make sure you write down the person's name and just send that person an email. That's an easy connection. That way, when somebody comes up for tenure, usually you have to find external reviewers.
Right.
And, if they haven't heard of you at all, but at least there's that one connection, maybe they'll like you back, and, it's not as intimidating as going right up and
introduce yourself.
Just say, I like that talk, and you might say, in particular, I was intrigued, by that,
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
I think, and that's actually a suggestion I've used myself. I remember getting that at one point too, when I was like, I don't want to talk to somebody, but I can send an email and say I enjoyed their talk. Yes.
I have another suggestion to add. it may be funny, but get yourself a friend who would be your voice, who would help you navigate these places. I used to be a useless introvert, absolutely useless. I wouldn't go and talk to anybody. But I had a friend, my best friend. He could sell a refrigerator to an Eskimo. He could talk to the walls. And so when we went to conferences, we always presented together. So I would do all the academic talking, and he would do all the social talking. So when I wanted to talk to a professor or somebody, I would say, Jeff, can we go talk to that person? So all I needed to do was just be a fly in the wall, stand next to him and just listen. So he will start the conversation, he'll create the connection. And all I needed to know was just listen to the person, and I got the opportunity, and gradually it helped me make my own, gain confidence to talk to human beings.
Yes.
And know that they won't chew my head off if I talk to them.
The buddy system, right? We learned that in kindergarten, at least some of us did. It seems like it's still applicable, right? I like that idea a lot. Any other ideas or suggestions that people might have for supporting first-generation graduate students? Or undergraduate students? Or even faculty, junior faculty?
I like your last slide, keeping the door open. In academia, we always remain behind shut doors. Everybody is so busy, we are working with our doors shut. If we keep the doors open, metaphorically, then people may come in. Right?
And literally too, I keep my door in my office open, and I get so many more students who come by and just say, hey, how's it going? One of my colleagues who's near me actually keeps her door shut. She's very busy. She's coming up for tenure, and she's very focused. And she's like, how do you have so many students who know you? I've been here years longer. I'm like, my door's open. They walk by and see me. Other suggestions or questions or comments?
Just when you play that clip of Kendrick, It Must Be Nice, I mean, all the things he was saying seemed like a variation of Peggy McIntosh's The Invisible Knapsack, which has been adopted for cisgender privilege. And it just seems someone should put something together like that, like this is what, being a first generation student is like.
Yeah. When I first saw that one, I sort of debated whether to include it, but then it really did start to resonate with me in that, all of these privileges that non-first generation and middle class don't even see. The idea that your parents would call you for money. I mean, many of our students who are not first generation are just boggled by the idea. But I myself had and continue to have financial support for my parents, or some financial support for my parents, right? And that's very typical, right, of high achieving first generation, not just, in academia, but in general, I would say, is that they have these additional supports, but it's completely foreign. It is one of those sort of invisible knapsack of privileges. I like that. Yeah.
Another thing that I have found is as faculty, we can be slightly more understanding and more accommodating. I remember being a TA in a business, in one of the business classes, and we had an 8 a.m. presentation. The final presentation, project presentation they had to do. One student did not turn up. And the other two members in the group were they were very angry, very upset, they didn't know. And that was the last class, and he had to come and present. But then, and he didn't send any information, we didn't know what happened, and then I had to write to him, and he explained that he works as a night security or what do you call it, in a residence hall, and there was a fire in the hall the previous night. So, yeah, I mean, he was up till about 6 in the morning, and he just could not wake up in time to show up at 8 o'clock. And he didn't have the courage to inform his group mates. But then how do you accommodate? Sometimes as faculty, I've had my colleagues tell me, okay, this person did not turn up in the right attire for the presentation. I did it because he was not dressed professionally. He may not have a jacket. He may not even have, full sleeve slack or come tucked in to class because he cannot afford it. And then he said, oh, I didn't think about that. Really?
And sometimes having these conversations with our colleagues. I had a situation a few years ago where I had a student who had a chronic problem with attendance. And I had talked to her and she sort of demurred, and finally I kind of continued to, why are we having these attendance problems? She didn't have daycare. She didn't have daycare. And so she was, and I'm like, well, bring the kid to class. I mean, you haven't, obviously if the baby's crying or something, you can take it outside, but, bring it to class. And one of my colleagues was like, oh my goodness, sometimes we have to be accommodating. I think that's excellent point.
I remember teaching a summer class where we teach during the day, all day for 2 weeks. One of the students who really wanted to attend had the same problem. She had a small baby, she didn't have a daycare. So I said, bring the student to class. I remember holding the baby and teaching.
Yeah.
The students were doing group work.
I've been there.
But then you have to do that, otherwise you're isolating and depriving many students of the opportunities.
Absolutely.
I would suggest to the first-gen students, remember you were an actor. And then if you can't be the role, pretend to be the role. Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's if you're not the most outgoing person, if all this stuff is difficult to you, at least pretend that, view it from an actor's lens. I'm doing a role. And go out there and do what you got to do, even if it's not who you really are.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
So, part of the themes that were arising throughout the presentations was in terms of the cultural relevance of the practices and teachings in the higher education at SU, or higher education institutions. And you can see, from an international student perspective, like the cultural perspectives or the cultural perspectives are mainly on mainstream, and when we say first generation, at least the international student could identify with a first generation in different ways, because we're talking about scarcity and we're talking about the culture of scarcity and how people would fit into this more affluent kind of practices. So I don't know whether it is studied or not, but in K-12 there is a lot on culturally relevant education and curriculum, but when it comes to higher education it stops. Yes. And this could be a very good area where, not only first generation, but think about also internationalizing the whole idea of school knowledge and I don't know, a lot of other perspectives, because when I think about it, then I think, why don't we learn about the education system of other countries, and not only New York, or not only the, why don't we learn about, we don't even learn about other states. Yeah. We just learn about, we just talk about the practices here, and then you would say, is this, what am I going to do with this kind of education back home? So.
That's an excellent point. And I think that's absolutely the case for sort of the move towards globalization and internationalization. But you make an excellent point. We don't even necessarily talk about the same kinds of issues, or we don't even necessarily pay attention to these sort of culturally relevant differences within whatever nation we're operating, within the United States in the case of this. Let alone looking at it globally. I think that's an excellent point.
One of the book contributors was talking about all the things that she had to do to kind of get up to speed, and she said one of the most helpful things was going to programming for international students, because it was the same stuff that she needed to know.
Yeah. Well, maybe one sort of important connection I'm making there is the importance of collaboration. Just, you know, first generation students, students of color, LGBT students, international students, pretty much anyone who's not part of the mainstream narrative, you know, we can sort of work together and share these kinds of information in ways that can be beneficial. I can absolutely think about ways in which what I learned working with international students is culturally relevant to a first generation student and vice versa. And there are ways in which this information can be collaborative, absolutely.
One of the other things that I do in my classes is when I have a mix of students, yes, in group projects, students like to choose their own groups. And they choose students who are like them all the time. So I kind of tell them right at the start, 50% of the time you get to choose, 50% of the time I choose. Mm-hmm. So we negotiate that, and then I say there's no negotiation beyond the 50%. So in some projects they choose who they want to work with, other projects are assigned. And I assign based on either they are local or international, or they are first gen, not first gen, etc. So I make sure they talk, and I also insist that they cannot sit in the classroom next to the same person for more than twice in a semester.
I love that idea.
Yeah, I force them to move around. They hate me for that, but I force them to do that.
That's such a great, because I mean, those of us who teach, all of you know that by like week 5, you'll have a situation where if somebody's chair is moved, or that is their chair. Those are fighting words, right? It's like, yeah, move it around, guys. I like to count. I make them count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But then they get clever, right, over the course of the semester, and they know I'm going to count to 3 or 4, and so they start sitting 4 away from their friends. And I'm like, come on now, this is more work than just working with someone you don't know, right? Right?
So that is why I don't allow them to get smarter than me.
That ongoing battle, right? Thank all of you for coming. I'm so excited with the book. Make all your friends buy it.